All right. Hello, everybody. I like how Zoke typed in that the music was epic, and then it swapped over to that song, to the Jinx song, and it was like a girl power rock anthem about shooting people in the face. So that is that's the kind of stream I run here. That's how it goes. We're epic music one moment, and then silly music the next. So I put out some feelers for some questions. Um, so I put some out on Twitter and I put some out in Discord. I like to thank everybody for responding to those and giving me a lot of material to work with tonight. P-Rod slapping in a T1 subscription here right at the beginning. It's good to see you again in person, P-Rod. I know you've been reduced to a lowly YouTube viewer recently, so it's good to see you in the stream. So, yeah, Justin is off watching wrestling or something, I guess, and I am here with the community Q&A. So I have got the stream. I've got the questions broken down into some sections so that I can work through it. Okay, and then I've got a list of all of the thanks to everybody who asked the questions at the end there. Some questions were Frant, how's it going? Some questions were redundant, so I've tried to condense those down where possible, and hopefully I'll answer multiple questions at the same time. So if you don't see your question worded exactly the way that you had asked it, I did. It's a Flesh and Blood main. I haven't had a chance to play that. That is on my list of things to try out. Just to play the game, see what the hype is about, because there's enough people playing it. I can't see myself getting into the secondary market for the game because the secondary market for the game is so ludicrous, right? So yeah, if you don't see your question in here, I did try to condense it down so that anything that were close to duplicates, or if they were related, I tried to smash them together. So yeah, okay, so without further ado, I'll jump right into the icebreaker questions. The first one here is, what's your Keyforge elevator speech? Essentially the Keyforge pitch. Now, it depends on who you are pitching Keyforge to, in my opinion. If you are pitching it to someone who is a card game veteran, then Keyforge is a very affordable alternative to collectible card games. And if they have never really played a lot of card games, there's probably a reason why that they don't play CCGs, or they may have only played CCGs briefly. If the person does not enjoy CCGs as they are, then I feel like Keyforge is a game for that person. It is a CCG for that person. You can get the CCG experience in miniature through Keyforge without having to throw as much money into a game as you normally do. In theory, you need $10 to buy one deck. No one else will ever have that deck. No one else can have that deck. That is your unique deck. And then you are now able to play against anybody else in the world who has a Keyforge deck. Whether or not it's a good deck or not, that's not the issue. You can still play against other people. So yeah, you can. And the thing about Keyforge is that it is a game where you can pick your commitment level to it. So you can be the person who drops a lot of money into Keyforge if you're used to buying several boxes whenever a new set of any game comes out. you can still do that in Keyforge, and you're kind of rewarded for it, right? Because you're still looking for a better deck. However, if you're somebody who likes to play a game only occasionally, you only need a deck or two, and you might pick up a deck every set or so, and you don't, and you could probably even pick up bulk decks on the secondary market if you're just looking to have some fun, just mess around with some stuff. Keyforge is a game that is extremely affordable, and you get the full CCG experience. And if you're someone who feels like there's a lot of waste in other CCGs where the vast majority of cards that you open will never get played, will never be sleeved, never see the inside of a competitive deck, then Keyforge is a game that doesn't waste a single card. Now, whether the players waste cards or not, that's a different story. But it's a Keyforge is a game, and it's a unique game, and I mean that more than beyond just the gimmick. The gimmick itself can get people to take a second look instead of just passing up over the game, right? That once you get past the gimmick, you discover that there's this really rich meta game, and learning how two decks face off against each other is like its own separate game. And when you realize that two decks playing against each other, there's a chance that game has never been played before, and then you realize then how many possible total games you can get out of a Keyforge box. That's when your mind really explodes with like the possibilities. I think just the more variety you have playing in the game, the more fun you have with it. There's a lot of other formats too, besides just sealed and Archon. You can do reversal and adaptive are both really fun and rewarding formats in their own right. So there's a lot to explore with the game. It's one of those where if you feel like if you play the game and you feel like the gimmick wears off pretty quick, there's a lot beyond the gimmick that you can still explore. So yeah, adaptive is a format I'll probably talk about a little bit later on. All right, and then my favorite card, I actually had to sit down and do some thinking about it. I knew here were the prerequisites. It was going to be a Brobnar card. No deck building. So there's a lot of people deck building in competitive CCGs is a myth, in my opinion, right? Exactly. There you have people who want to be rogue. And to that end, Keyforge is the game for them, right? Because when you're a rogue deck builder, what you want is a deck that no one else has, right? You want something, and Keyforge is that game where no one else can have the deck that you have. And so you can find some decks that are more competitive than they might initially look, if you spend some time digging into it, right? So yeah, I think when it comes to deck construction for Keyforge, it is a moot point. However, players think it is a relevant point. Breaking through that barrier where you're basically saying deck construction is a non-issue for Keyforge. That is not an easy thing to do, but I do not think it is a relevant argument for a card game, right? So, and once you like, it's one of those where I know people like to go through the ritual of building decks, right? People like to see the deck laid out in front of them. They like to mess around with a few pieces of it, draw some test hands and stuff like that. So there's a ritual around deck building that exists. where you enter like this zen-like state while you're examining a deck, trying to determine what's in the sideboard, what you would take out in specific matchups and stuff like that. And Keyforge does not have that aspect of it. Now you could still perform a ritual with your deck where you draw some test hands. You can test out a couple of that still exists. But I think that the actual deck building, once you realize that when you're free from it, you get so much more time to just play the game, than that part I think is fun. So yeah, so you'll have people who are like, who will take a competitive deck and then change like a couple of cards. They'll put like some specific, tech into their deck, right? They'll pick just a couple of cards different, and and that's like their signature card or whatever. So yeah, exactly. The deck building in Keyforge is like coming through the secondary market, right? That's how you would try to find, that's the closest thing you would find to deck building. So yeah. So, and I get that, but at the same time, I think there are very few matchups in Keyforge that are 100% stone cold losses when you're talking about like competitive Archon decks, right? You may have to change some things, some stuff may have to go your way to win that match. But the way two decks match up, especially based off of draw variance and all that stuff, there's so many variables that go into any specific game that it's hard to say what you would need to change in like what you would sideboard out, right? That's another one of those moot decisions. How many times have we said about decks where, man, if this rad penny were, or if this bad penny were just any other Shadows card, this deck would be so much better, right? But that's not the case. There are matchups where the card that seems like the worst card in your deck ends up being potentially a great card. And I think my favorite example of this was I was playing Christensen at Gen Con in 2019, and I played against Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude was playing an Untamed deck, and Jean-Claude like played turn 1 Dust Pixie, and I discarded my Annihilation Ritual. I thought long and hard, but then I ended up discarding Annihilation Ritual because Christensen really wanted to use the double Arise in the deck. But I actually had a chance to kill the Dust Pixie with an Annihilation Ritual and purge it, because I thought to myself, what if he regrowths it? And that's exactly what he did on the following turn, is he fought the Dust Pixie into something, regrowthed it, and like forged a key on his turn 2 or turn 3. And I was like, man, I always discard this Annihilation Ritual, but I considered playing it in this one instance, and it was actually the correct call. So that's the kind of thing I think you can really, it's the deck building exercise, is the actual examination of the deck and playing it, putting it through the iteration, putting it through the works, basically, so that you know the deck inside and out. So I was thinking another way to pitch it is that, like, in, say, like in an anime, like Yu-Gi-Oh, for example. In Yu-Gi-Oh, the Blue Eyes White Dragon was like a legendary card that only a handful of people had, right? You play actual Yu-Gi-Oh, and Blue Eyes White Dragon was like a promo card, and so, in competitive collectible CCGs, nobody has a legendary card, right? Nobody has a card that nobody else has. In Keyforge, you do actually get those unique decks, right? You're like, oh, that's, Maximo, right? That right there, so you actually get those stories behind decks, and they get pedigrees, and they have a mythology, and that is not the case for other collectible CCGs, and Keyforge has that, and that's a unique thing. And the community in Keyforge is small enough that those legendary decks, those named decks, are known, and you have a chance to play against them. And you may get your clock cleaned, but that's fine, right? I think that's really cool. It's an underrated aspect of Keyforge. But that's something that this game does that no other game literally can do. So emphasizing the race aspect. Yeah, so and I'll address shifts in the gaming design later on. I have a couple questions asked about stuff, and I'll talk about those there. But that is a good point too. The racing aspect is not like other games where you're trying to bludgeon your opponent to death. And that has an appeal, like a wider appeal. So that is a good way to approach Keyforge. So I think Keyforge is a multifaceted game, and my favorite thing about Keyforge may not be somebody else's favorite thing about Keyforge. Justin and I think got lucky in that we were streaming this game, and then we went on to win Vault Tours with decks, right? So we have like signature decks. And so that's something I may enjoy about the game, but that is not necessarily something other people. That's not like a selling point to other people, per se. So they may enjoy just the mechanics of the game, because there's a lot of neat mechanics that go on in Keyforge. So now that was a pretty long elevator pitch. I'm assuming we were trapped in an elevator with several strangers, one of which was the devil. And we were trying to figure out who the devil was. And when somebody got to me and asked me if I was the devil, I just answered by going on a very long spiel about Keyforge. And so whether or not I was the devil, they assume that I am, because I've bored them about a card game. Anyway, moving on to the next question. So my favorite card, like I said earlier, it was going to be a Brobnar card. I wasn't sure that it was going to be a creature. I almost picked Relentless Assault, just because I love that card. But in a vacuum by itself, it's not particularly a good card. My favorite card is I actually wanted to make sure that I picked if best case scenario, I picked a card that was in Conphage, just because Conphage is my favorite deck. And it is Rock Hurling Giant. I love this card. This card is a great Brobnar card. There are lots of people who will say this is the best Brobnar card because it lets you discard your other Brobnar cards and not feel guilty about it. Because they hate Brobnar, and they happen to be wrong. But, the Rock Hurling Giant is a really interesting design. It's a card that got better as other sets were released. For instance, this card combos with the Yerks from AOA. So if you discard a Brobnar card to a Yerk during your disc turn, you get to use Rock Hurling Giant. That's cool. That's I love that. Those mechanics. I love this card. It does a lot of the stuff that I want to see in the game. It fights for the board particularly well. It's a big creature. It's just a really fun card. So this is my favorite Keyforge card after I put some deliberation into it. And it's a simple enough card. But I don't need my favorite card to be a really flashy card. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I think this card is very fair. Ultimately, it's powerful. It's rare. And I feel like this is like the power level rare should be. You should see them when you see a rare. You should be like, oh, okay, Rock Hurling Giant. Yeah, that card's pretty good. So, I like exactly. We've had plenty of arms arms control debates about rock hurling giant on stream. So yeah, you need a license to operate a rock, honestly. But getting a rock to throw at people should at least be as difficult as buying a car, in my opinion. But anyway, there you go. Rock hurling giant is my favorite card. All right, so moving on into, so these are questions related to the game of Keyforge. So what's your approach to Keyforge to help ensure you continue to enjoy the game? I would say the biggest thing about Keyforge is, even though I stream it a lot, it is not the only game I play. And because if it was, I think I would probably lose my mind. Because there are some absurd, ridiculous things that can happen in Keyforge. And while it's fun to be the person doing something absurd and ridiculous, when you're on the receiving end of it, you can only stand so many losses to like Martian generosity. You're getting infernused 16 times before you don't want to like play the game anymore. So I meter my enjoyment with Keyforge. I'm actually pretty glad there's not a official Keyforge client. If anybody's played Hearthstone or Legends of Runeterra or any game that has a ladder system in it, could you imagine the pressure Justin and I would have to do well on a Keyforge ladder if there was like an official client? It would be really, really difficult to maintain that level of enjoyment, and you're going to have people who would grind the game 16 hours a day, maybe even more, to be at the top of the ladder. I think Keyforge is a game that is exactly, yeah, I only got Diamond 2 this month, right? So yeah, a good friend of mine who streams, we played FNM together. She plays Magic online, and she like tries to hit double mythic every month, in limited and then in constructed. And it sounds like a lot of grinding to me. And while Justin and I designed the format for the stream to take up a lot of space, we wanted to make sure that we were presenting as many unique games as possible. The ladder climb for Keyforge would be interesting, right? You could also see like how far you could take a deck. That would be something pretty interesting. And like, okay, this deck, I climbed to silver, and this deck got hard stuck at silver. I couldn't get this deck any further, right? I think it would be neat to have something like that. But yeah, a deck ladder I think would be a better idea instead of like a player on. So yeah, I think there's some neat things you can do, right? With like a Keyforge system that was tracking deck ratings and player ratings and stuff like that. But I just don't know. I don't know how much enjoyment you would get from it, or how exhausting it would be. I've got a feeling it would be very exhausting. So while part of me wants there to be a digital client, I think a digital client would probably mean the end of my competitive Keyforge playing, at least digitally. I'd still play in person, but digitally, I don't think I could play Phage for 8 hours a day. Right? The deck is so inconsistent. It would drive me crazy. If you're playing like 3 to 4 games an hour for 8 to 10 hours a day, if you go on a losing skid, right? If you play enough games, you'll hit skids where you'll lose like 5-6 games in a row. I would be ready to like throw Confage in a trash can. And it's not. I just got unlucky, right? So yeah, I think that's one of my major ways to keep enjoyment with the game is that I measure. I don't think it's a I don't think I have like a limited Keyforge tank, right? Like an energy bar that I drain while playing Keyforge. I don't think that is the case. Um, it's when I feel like I'm playing the same game over and over again. That's when it feels like I'm not enjoying Keyforge. Um, and because another reason why I play Keyforge is because it's such a unique experience compared to other games. Um, you know, like so yeah. I uh it's a IRL friend texted me a question for the middle of this. All right. Anyway, so all right. Okay. What are the best tools for getting better as a player? I would say the best tools are going to be some sort of support team around you. Your play group is how you probably get better at Keyforge. You can certainly consume content on Keyforge, um, and you will learn things by watching people play with cards that you haven't seen before. And you know, so there's a lot of content out there that can increase your knowledge of the game, but ultimately I think you have to play the game to get better. And if you play the game with people that are like-minded, then you will all of your goals are to like get better at the game. I think that is the best way to get into it. I think communities around the game are very strong. They're very, you know, you've got you know, ABR and Reap. There's a lot of crossover between teams as well. There's like that. There was that. What was it? The Key Chargers or whatever. There was um, the there was a group. They were based out of like I want to say Kentucky or whatever. And they traveled around and stuff like that. And those guys were competitive. They always they would put people into day 2 at a vault tour and stuff like that. And that's because they played Keyforge locally, and they were a tough crew. You know, it's one of those where Key Chargers are out of Indy. Okay. I thought they were out of I knew they were out of like Midwestish area, so yeah. And I think that's the thing about the game is that like when you find somebody who enjoys the game as much as you do, it feels like you're instantly friends, right? You're like and you start talking about that. You start talking about like cards, you know, sealed events and stuff like that. So they had a very aggressive approach to the game. Yeah, well, so and I think they were like, so they have the mindset of like closing out games, right? And that comes from other card games. And honestly, I think it's a good mindset to have for competitive Keyforge. Like, how do I win this game? Instead of trying to stop my opponent from winning, because keeping your opponent from winning is not the same thing as you winning the game. So, but yeah, so I think the best tools for getting better as a player are the people around you in Keyforge. So, and there's a lot of online communities too. So even if you don't have like a strong local physical group, you could still try to fit in with one of the online gaming groups out there. There's a lot of people playing a lot of Keyforge online. So, what are the most powerful cards or combos for cross-set play? So I think there are quite a few cards singularly by themselves that you have to be aware of. Infernus is probably closer to the top of that list. I know Infernus has probably taken a hit if Mass Mutations is more popular. So Mass Mutations as a set is like pretty good versus Infernus for the most part. In Mass Mutations, I think you got to watch out for Dark Amber Vault decks. I think those really separated themselves from the pack. The card drawing capability from that card is pretty disgusting. I've always said that if you're drawing 1 or 2 cards extra in a turn, it's not going to make that much difference. But if you're drawing more, then your deck is going to get an advantage. So anytime you draw upwards of like 5 cards in a turn, that's where disgusting things can start happening. So to that end, I think Martian Generosity is still a very powerful card. It may not be in vogue right now, but if you were to play at a Vault Tour, I would expect to stumble across a Martian Generosity deck. There's a lot of artifacts out there, I think, that demand answers. The demand answers, or you can lose to them. Grump Buggy, I think, is still one of those cards that if you're not ready for Grump Buggy, then you're gonna be in for a rude surprise. So, I still think Gangernaut is a combo worth mentioning. You got to have the right setup around it. By themselves isn't it enough to win a game? So, do I think combo has a place in Keyforge? I think so. I think a combo deck needs to have other things going for it, because disruption is pretty powerful in Keyforge. A card like Infernus can just purge a key part of a combo and you'll never see it again. So yeah, Heart of the Forest will change the game too. So now I think Heart of the Forest decks are just brain draining to play. It takes a certain kind of sicko that wants to play that deck all day in a Vault Tour. But yeah, I mean, like, if you don't have an answer for Heart of the Forest, just be prepared for that game. You'll stumble across somebody playing Heart of the Forest, and you're going to be like, oh man, I was not ready for this. Now the key thing to keep in mind about Heart of the Forest deck is to just make sure you put the pressure on them. Make sure, like, force them to combo out to win. And once again, if you've got disruption, you can mess up a Heart of the Forest day. So yeah, I still think there's a lot of Worlds Collide combos that are powerful. Tribute is a powerful card in combination with a lot of Saurian cards. I know Worlds Collide has probably fallen off the radar a little bit, as Mass Mutations appears to have taken a more dominant place in the metagame. But there's still a lot of really powerful cards. The Logos in Worlds Collide can enable some very quick decks. You could have some Logos Star Alliance Worlds Collide decks that just blaze through the whole deck, and set up some powerful combos in other houses. So that's all stuff to keep in mind. I haven't had a chance to play in a Vault Tour in quite some time, so I would be really interested to see what the breakdown would be throughout the day. So there's still some Coda decks that'll crush it too, because they're just all quality cards, just very efficient. So, and what cards or combos would excite you in Sealed? And I believe this is actually for the last 3 sets. So in Sealed for Dark Tidings, I would want a Logos or Star Alliance deck. Hopefully 2 of both of those houses together, right? Like, those decks together are just, they seem to be so much better than a lot of the other Dark Tidings decks. So yeah, I'm hoping Keyforge Live will have some good numbers for us to pull from, to take a look at. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now in Mass Mutations, I would look for, if it's sealed, the common level combos are best. So in sealed, I would look for like a bow kniving safe house deck, assuming it could answer a board, assuming one of the other two houses was pretty good at dealing with the board. Bow knifing safe house is a very good combo. I believe both of those cards are common, so you are very likely to have them, or you can get them together in a deck. Safe house may be uncommon, I'm not entirely sure, but it felt pretty likable. It was an uncommon. Okay, yeah. So it's an uncommon, but you know, and safe house combos with Rad Penny as well. Secret Needle, Rad Penny's particularly good as well. Those are very good combos at the common level in Mass Mutations, and then you could also maybe get double Grey Rider in Sanctum. You would have to have a deck that was very good at clearing the board for the double Grey Rider to do anything, but that's something to look for. Other than that, I don't really look for specific rares in combination with stuff for sealed, because you're just so unlikely to see it. Sometimes you'll get lucky, right? It's like going to a Worlds Collide sealed tournament and hoping you open an anomaly. The chances of you opening an anomaly in your decks are very, very low. So it's like, don't plan on having like a ghost form that you can slap on an Eddy. If you open that, awesome, but chances are you're not going to get that, so don't plan on it. So yeah, I would take a look at like the common strategies and then kind of go from there. What do I think is the most skill intensive format and why? Exactly. It's exactly like that, Player Herb. Yeah, I didn't plan on opening Gangernaut or Martian Generosity, but when I opened Gangernaut and Martian Generosity, I did the best that I could do with that deck. So, I think adaptive. It's got to be adaptive. Give your opponent Scowly Reaper, Grey Rider. They rule of 6. They rule of 6 Scowly. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Okay, so I do think adaptive is probably the most skill intensive format. Sealed adaptive possibly. I think the thing with regular adaptive is that you will end up bringing decks that are very specific. When I was getting ready for the KFPL season 1, I went through the collection. I played a lot of decks, and then settled on Ardreth as an adaptive deck. And there were a couple of considerations for that. I know Ugluk's in chat. Ugluk and I did a decent amount of playtesting getting ready for the KFPL season 1. And the more I played with Ardreth, the more I appreciated how consistent the deck was. I think that's like a hallmark of an adaptive deck. It's going to play roughly the same every time you play the deck. So that typically means it's going to have a lot of doubles. So look for it. So anyway, if you're playing Archon adaptive, what you're going to do is you're going to end up picking a deck specifically for adaptive and then preparing with it, right? So you might argue that there's not as much skill in Archon adaptive versus like sealed adaptive, right? I think if you're trying to test pure knowledge of the game, opening a sealed deck, playing it against someone, swapping and playing it, and then if one deck won bidding chains, I think that's a pretty good indicator. I don't think there's a perfect Keyforge format. That's why I was really excited about the Worlds format, where you've got a team and one person's playing adaptive and one person's playing Archon and one person's playing reversal or whatever. Like to me, that's, or Triad. I think it was Archon best of 3 Triad, and then like that's a fun format right there, because that's testing a lot of skills across a lot of different players. That's a sweet format. And ideally that's what you would test if you're like 2 players, right? Like you're you almost need a decathlon to determine who the best player is. However, I think adaptive is a very good skill testing environment, because you gotta be able to play with whatever deck is put in front of you. So there you go. I saw the that proposal in the Discord earlier. The triad, where one triad gets banned, so both team members have a triad, and then you play two triads against each other, and if there's a tiebreaker, the decks that lost from each of the triads play the O2 decks against each other. That's a neat format. That's probably a good 2x2 format that does require a pile of decks. So okay. And is DT ever going to have a competitive revival like Age of Ascension, or is it a lost cause? So DT may have a place in competitive tournaments once enough DT gets played. The thing is, the total number of DT decks opened right now is very, very small compared to other sets. The set has not been well received by the community at large. And that's probably a factor of a number of things. And I know I have been down on the set playing it as long as we have for our tournament. However, I do think there's some potentially very disgusting DT decks that can exist, and I think the ratio is going to be something similar to AOA, maybe even rarer than AOA, just because DT decks feel largely dysfunctional, which is kind of a shame. Because I think the deck has some really interesting ideas. I think it's just a victim of play testing. Like a lot of things. So Worlds Collide feels like it wasn't play tested, but Worlds Collide was functional. In DT doesn't quite feel play tested enough, and it feels dysfunctional. Whereas Max Mutations does feel play tested. I think the nature of enhancements made Max Mutations easier to design. But it ended up being balanced, like, because of the random wacky stuff that you would have to do to have like a really degenerate mass mutation decks. Now, I believe a lot of those degenerate mass mutation decks have been discovered and are making the rounds. But I could imagine like an unfathomable deck that Dark Discoveries and Key Frogs and honors Kesis and wins the game on like turn 6. After just blazing through the whole deck, right? And so I could see decks like that existing and being really, really good. But I think they're going to be pretty rare. I don't think DT is a lost cause. I think one of my biggest regrets is not enjoying the first round of this Dark Tidings tournament, because I don't know how many people watched the round 1 and then like didn't make it to round 2. Round 2 we've generally been having some fun with. There's only been one pod in round 2 that I felt myself just getting angrier the more we played it. The Dark Tidings is a set that it's an acquired taste. It's a lot like Age of Ascension in that way, except I would say that it is worse than Age of Ascension is for sealed. It certainly feels that way. So what ended up being your biggest disappointment, or what decks ended up being your biggest disappointment, and what decks did you warm up to? So I'll actually answer the second part of that first. Decks so there were a lot of decks that made deep runs in the tournament. In the tournaments that we played, that are decks that I think a lot of people wouldn't have taken a second look at, and those are the decks that have like a special place in my heart. And I think of like the Logos Brobnar Untamed deck from Coda that ended up getting second place and getting absolutely trounced by Barkus. I can't think of the deck's name right now. I'm trying desperately to think of it. And the deck that we had, K Vibius in AOA, was a deck that we played round one, and we were like, wow, this deck was fun. And then like the more we played it, and the more we've played K Vibius against other decks, we were like, K Vibius is a really fun deck. It's very creature heavy. We feel like that's not good against every deck, and it's not. But it holds its own, right? Like it's a grunt buggy deck. It'll establish a board that doesn't go away. Not Christensen. Christensen is a disappointment. I don't think it's my biggest disappointment. Christensen did win me $100 in like the one IRL Keyforge money tournament that I played. Yeah, Lion, was it Dead Claw? Lion Osteotense Dead Claw? Dead Claw Lion Osteotense, yeah. Dead Claw is a deck that really warmed up to us. And on paper, it doesn't look like anything special. Look at that, 65 sass. It's a 65 sass deck. And if we go back and we take a look at the sass of decks it dispatched in our Tournament of Champions for original Coda, I bet there are like 75, 80 sass decks that deck just dealt with. So that's like a a deck. It just goes to show sass is a tool to use, and it's not the end all be all. You ultimately got to play a deck to really appreciate it. So yeah, all right. And so the biggest disappointment in my opinion is this deck right here, the Naturalist Who Camouflages Breakfast. This deck went 3-0 in the first round of our Coda tournament. Now, this is back when Justin and I could barely play the game. We had very little knowledge of what we were doing while we were playing, but this felt like a deck that could not lose a game when we initially played it. It was very slow to win. This deck just grinds out games, because if you look at counts, it's only got 10 creatures and it only has like 11 there are 13 expected amber, right? So you're not even expected to generate enough amber to win the game the first time through the deck. However, this deck, it says 19 creature control. I don't even know what a good creature control these days is. This deck does not let the opponent keep creatures on the table. Between like it's got twin bolts and coward's ends, and it just has 3 fates and tendrils. It's really good at killing creatures left and right. It's got to like control the weak. It's got like it feels like a classic control shell in a like in other CCG terms. This feels like a control deck where you just don't let your opponent win the game and you'll get around to winning the game. It even has the Creeping Oblivion, right? So this was a deck that Justin and I thought we could Infernus people to death with before Infernus was printed as a card. We were like, you just play Creeping Oblivion on them. You just keep the opponent from ever winning a game, and then you just Creeping Oblivion their key cards. And it has 2 effervescence, so it was like really good at stopping piles of amber, because you just burn the pile of amber. It's got to burn the stockpile. It's got a Lash of Broken Dreams, so you could like lash the opponent to make them have to forge for 9. You've got mind barbs and control the weak to kind of control like what they can do on their turn. And then this deck fell flat on its face in the second round of the tournament, and we were like shocked. We were like, what happened? We thought this deck was like a shoe-in to win, and it's because Keyforge is not a game that is played like other games, right? And this deck doesn't actually have enough amber control to stop the opponent from winning. And you can like learn to play against a deck like this, where you optimize your creatures on board and you prioritize certain things, stuff like that. So this is a deck that I feel like was one of our biggest disappointments, earliest in the stream's history. So yeah, this is a deck that we were like really high on. We were like, man, I don't know what this deck, man, it's going to be unstoppable, and we were completely wrong. Okay, and so we've got some the next section here is the community-based questions. How much person in play did we get prior to COVID? So Justin and I were traveling to most, but not all. We would prioritize the sealed vault tours just because of the nature of our stream. We are more adept at sealed play than we are necessarily Archon play. But we would and we would also try to prioritize vault tours that were like double vault tours, so stuff like PAX and Gen Con were like 2 vault tours at the same time. We're traveling to those, but locally Justin and I would maybe get a chain bound once a month, and that was just because our local communities were languishing. We couldn't get new people into the game. We had a hard time finding a local group. The game, there were some people that I knew from like the Netrunner days and from War Machine and stuff like that were excited to play the game. The game had just came out. We sat down to play it. We were at the local shop. We were, playing around with it, having fun. A guy came in and was like, "Oh yeah, Keyforge, man, you guys got one of those 4 horsemen decks?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I got a 4 horsemen deck. Those are so cool." And it was just like I was like, "Oh man, I'm super super pumped for the future of this game." And those people disappeared, and they did not play the game after that. Did not see them. I don't know what happened to the local scene. I think part of the problem when it comes to comic stores and hobby, or I should say hobby stores, because some are just straight up game stores. They don't necessarily deal with comics, but a lot of comic shops will have games attached to them as well. So when it comes to comic stores, if you've got an employee that plays a game, you will have customers who play the game, right? You need like a champion locally at the store to carry the game, to carry the banner for that game, even when other people don't want to. The employee is doing so much service for the game locally, and I don't think any of the local stores really had that. So I think that's part of the reason why it kind of like floundered locally. Now we played in a couple of chain bounds. Smaller games are really the on the wrong side of that, right? It's like Magic. Magic is like a freebie these days, right? Like if you were to put together a games bingo card of games you have played or have played in the past, Magic is like a free square in the center these days. You could maybe even Pokemon might be in that free square. I don't know, but like those games almost don't count. Everybody and their brother has a commander deck now. If you don't have a commander deck, you can go buy one. They sell pre-made commander decks that you won't be embarrassed to necessarily play at a table, just because it's such a popular format. So yeah, you don't have anything like that for Keyforge. Keyforge just it feels like it's a there's a really small community that are super devoted to it. So yeah, I'm the thing I'm worried about that too is you end up with player attrition, so that you don't have new people coming into the game, um, and people will occasionally leave the game, which means your player base only ever gets smaller, and that is not good for the long term health of a game. So yeah, um, I kind of went off on a tangent. Besides the how much did we get to play in person? That was like uh the I think there's more in the tournament section on that I was planning to talk about like developing communities and stuff like that. So, oh yeah, I'm sorry. The second question right here. Ha! No, I organized this earlier intentionally this way so that way I could like talk on the same subject. So, any advice on how to rejuvenate a meta that was thriving pre-COVID and is floundering now? So I think you could probably there were a couple of good ideas that had been employed in the past, and one of those is like a take a deck, leave a deck box locally, and you would really need to make sure that you have an employee keep an eye on it. But you could have a box of essentially free Keyforge decks, and if somebody wanted a new deck to play, all they do is just throw a deck in that box and they pull out one of the free decks. I think there's some stuff like that you could do. Sky Jedi has his Project Reforge, and what he does is he makes ready to play kits for people, including a deck. It's another one of those. It's a free deck. You hand it to somebody if you're interested in playing the game, and you don't even want to spend any money on it. Fine, I'll give you the tokens, I'll give you a deck, try it out. That's all I'm asking. And I think a lot of those initiatives can probably help if you're looking to recruit people or even just to get people back into the game. If you've got a Dark Tidings deck and you're not particularly happy with it, then just give it to somebody, and I think you can end up doing. Yeah, oh yeah. No, I agree. Like I said, you need somebody who's going to shepherd that box. You could even be that dude who shows up on a Saturday if you got a Keyforge group that meets locally. You could just take the box with you on a Saturday. If you've got a tournament organizer who does the chain bounds and stuff like that, you can just have the deck out while you're playing Keyforge. And if somebody says, "Oh, that game's neat," you just give them a deck. Here you go. Here's a deck. Just this. There's so many. There's the decks in this game that aren't competitive are still great learning tools. And you can have some funny names. You never know what's gonna hit that right chord with somebody to make them really want to play the game. And chances are you were never going to play that deck again anyway, right? So you might as well get some value out of it by handing it off to somebody else. So I think that can help. Making sure that the events are consistent, even when nobody shows up. And I know it sucks. You go 3 weeks in a row and nobody shows up those 3 weeks in a row. Like that is awful. Find something else to play, schedule something else instead, and play that. And if somebody shows up for Keyforge, pull out your Keyforge deck and play them. Have like a backup plan of Keyforge and play like Marvel Champions or something else. If you've got if you're having a hard time getting like people to show up regularly, and you gotta like be okay with knowing when to throw in the towel. Sometimes I think local communities. I struggled to have Magic tournaments run when I was working at the comic shop 15 years ago. I had struggled to have Magic tournaments run consistently. It baffled me. Magic was so popular, but we would have a ton of people show up for Friday Night Magic, and then we'd try to run like Constructed on Saturdays, and it'd fire off like 3 weeks in a row, and then it would just die. And we'd still have stuff on the schedule, but nobody would ever show up for it. And you'd have like a couple people show up, and you kind of feel like you wasted everybody's time. but you got to know when to throw in the towel. There's no sense in making yourself go crazy. That's why it really helps when an employee of the local game store is really into the game, because they do that on the clock, and you can find something else to do. So, okay, that's some stuff there. I think other people might have better ideas. Justin and I aren't really community organizers when it comes to Keyforge stuff. You got to kind of like, um, like I said, you got to be able to roll with the punches, because it can be kind of disheartening. So, what kind of new content would I love to see from the community? So this is actually, I think the community does a pretty good job with content for Keyforge. There's a ton of podcasts. There are a handful of video channels for Keyforge. And honestly, the content that I want to see for Keyforge isn't going to be community based. It's going to have to come from FFG. That's what I would rather see. Because community content will always have that community feel to it. Some of it's going to feel more polished than others. If you're like me and Justin, you get better with it at time, and you just make the goal to try to keep improving at it. I like where Justin and I have gotten to. We could probably still make improvements. I feel like we haven't had a chance to really grow a lot during COVID, but we came up with some pretty good ideas during COVID. We had the belt, we did a lot of stuff, and I think the community at large does a pretty good job of coming up with events to run. The community loves iterating on format types, right? They keep trying to find a new way to play the game, and there's a lot of those formats that are pretty cool. The one format, I forget exactly what it was, that was recent, but it was like, you bring 2 decks, and you ban a house, and you can play one of your decks as long as it wasn't of the banned house. I forget exactly what it was called. It was a community run event. I think Time Shapers or Swindled were the ones running that format, and they have like a write-up out on it in the last couple of days. But that's really cool. Karen ran that. Okay, yeah. So the Swindle group ran that event, but it's a really interesting format, right? Because it's like you bring 2 decks with different houses, and then you ban a house, and people can't play either of the banned houses. What does that do for your deck diversity? So first off, you got to bring 2 decks that have 3 different houses, and then you want to so there's some really cool formats that are out there, right? So I think the community has done a very good job of generating content, and based off of the numbers, the Keyforge community content creator numbers would be very disheartening for people making content for other games, right? If Justin and I were like Magic streamers and we saw the numbers that we see, we probably would have packed it up a long time ago, right? Because we felt like the community hadn't really responded to us, if you were a numbers oriented person. Now for Keyforge, I think your numbers are going to be several factors of 10 lower than what you expect for other games and whatnot. I mean, the most popular content that Justin and I have put out on our YouTube channel has not been Keyforge related. It's been related to other games. And so it was one of those where if we wanted to, Ouroboros, that's the name of the format. Yep, thank you. If we were a numbers driven stream, we would have abandoned Keyforge a long time ago. But we love the game so much. That's why we stick with Keyforge primarily. And so I think what you get from creating content from the Keyforge community at large is not a lot in return. Um, so it's the people who are making Keyforge content for the community love the game. That much to me is very clear. So the community creators have done the vast majority of free marketing for this game. I would like to see more from FFG. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more in one of the later sections. But that's really what I want to see. I want to see some extra marketing thrown at the game, because that way you feel like you've got I don't know, that way it feels like you're devoting time to a game for a reason, instead of just because you love it. So, all right. Or for a reason beyond just the love of the game. All right, so Keyforge design questions. What would I change about the game? I think I would change very little. I think my biggest complaint is the lack of cross-house synergy in the game. And I think that is a partial design decision. So if I had the opportunity to develop the next Keyforge set, what would I call it? What would the overall theme or mechanic be? And what houses would I include? So I actually like the graveyard mechanic of the Grim Reaper. I think there's a wealth of design potential in that area where you make the game about the discard pile. And I think Infernus is a card that kind of like ruins that strategy, which is it's a crying shame. But you could print basically an anti-Infernus card at like the common level, that in that punishes the opponent if they purge cards from you, something along those lines. And you could make it in such a broad way that this strategy just doesn't lose to Infernus. I think having like a graveyard recursion set would be sort of fun. Yeah, sort of like Recycling Bin, but a little bit more widely applicable. I think if you, I think the big thing, the yeah, exactly. It could be a common creature that has a line of text that, like, while it's in your discard pile, your opponent cannot target your discard pile, something along those lines. And you could have it be like a big creature or whatever. And so you've always got the choice to just pitch it, something along. It might be one of those the cure is worse than a disease kind of thing, because it might just enable some dumb stuff. And Infernus was the only way that you could have stopped the stuff in the first place. But I think I think you could do stuff. You could do stuff to get around the Infernus problem, and but like the Grim Reaper mechanic, like having 10 cards in your graveyard so that your creatures come into play ready, the haunt. I think that's a really awesome mechanic. And so designing a set, you could design a set that interacts with the purge zone as well, because like purging would be, you could have purging be like a fairly common mechanic in the set, but it is counteracted by these other cards that like grab stuff from the purge zone. There's some interesting design space that you could mess with there. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into this question because whenever I sit down and think about Keyforge design, I almost end up designing like 50 cards or whatever. And while it's not like a waste of time, it's one of those where it's like I don't know where I could put that energy into Path of Exile or something, right? it's fun to do like the design decisions and stuff like that. But honestly, I would try to focus on making cards that are more broadly applicable than a lot of the stuff that gets printed. That's one of my biggest complaints about AOA is you have cards like Soldiers to Flowers that refer only to Untamed. You have so many like house referring cards. That's part of the reason why Mars was a frustrating house to play in the first set, because Mars was referring specifically to like a lot of Mars cards and only work with other Mars cards. So and Star Alliance is usually referring to non-Star Alliance cards. So that's why Star Alliance feels so much better, because 2/3 of your deck isn't Star Alliance. So when you play something like a Comm Officer Carabini, it lets you play stuff from your other houses. Like that's like a good feeling, and I feel like you should have more stuff like that. You should have Brobnar cards that put creatures into play from your hand to fight. From any house. You should have stuff that has efficiency across the other the other houses, so that Logos doesn't have a monopoly on it. And that's the third question here. What houses need to go in the next set or sets, and why? How can they balance Logos efficiency with all the other houses across sets? Stop making Logos the only house that deals with the archives. Dis and Shadows had some cards that dealt with the archives, but you're talking about like uncommons and rares for the most part. So yeah, I could see a house that let you spend, or I could see a set that let you spend Amber to do other things. But think about the card Ostracize. Ostracize is a pretty powerful card. You have to lose 1 Amber to play it, and then it doesn't generate any Amber. So I don't think you could print too many cards that have that cost in them, because what happens if you have a deck that has 4 Ostracizes in it? Like you you can certainly answer creatures, but it's not winning you the game. So I think that's the issue, because that has been something that's been floating around for a while. You could even print a card that like let you get a really powerful effect for unforging one of your own keys, and but at the same time you have to forge a key first, and your goal is to forge keys anyway. So yeah, that'd be a neat mechanic. That's probably how the Dark Amber should have been handled in Mass Mutations anyway, right? Like, if you play a bad Penny and she steals 1 Amber, she instead says destroy one of your opponent's Ambers, gain a Dark Amber, and now a Dark Amber is in play. I think that could be an interesting mechanic, and so that way when you're like stealing Amber back and forth, if you capture an Amber, it's a Dark Amber. You could have a card on it that said like destroy a creature that has a Dark Amber on it. You could do a lot of interesting. The problem with cards like that is you got to be careful with parasitic mechanics that only work inside of one set. Because what if that card is like a Maverick, or sorry, a Legacy or whatever, right? Like, how does that card function in the greater scheme of things? It's that type of thing. And you don't want to like put too many rules in the game that exist only in a rule book and not on cards. So you don't want to like give Dark Amber a special mechanic where if a creature captures a Dark Amber at the start of the turn, they're destroyed or something. So yeah, exactly. I think there's some neat things you could do with it, right? And if your opponent has Dark Amber, the problem is like, how does that play for cross set play? Francis the Economist could say, give you an Amber, give your opponent a Dark Amber, right? There's an Dark Amber functions exactly like Amber, except it's just referred to on some cards. Francis could say steal a Dark Amber from your opponent. If your opponent doesn't have a Dark Amber, they gain a Dark Amber and you gain 1. Something along those lines. I'm just spitballing there. Just simple. The goal is to try to keep the design simple, right? I think Worlds Collide, Mass Mutations, and Dark Tidings suffer from complexity creep. To make Keyforge more interesting, you have to add like new mechanics, and that makes the game more complex, which then makes it more difficult for somebody to get into the game starting at that set, right? So I do think you got to be careful about designing too many mechanics. Okay. I'm going to wrap up that section, move on to tournaments. Best tip for prepping for a competitive event. I think one of the best things you can do is set expectations for yourself. And try to keep them realistic. If you go to an event and you expect to win the event and you don't, you're going to be kind of disappointed. But if your goal was to make day 2 and you go 4-2, that might be a little bit disappointing, but you were you gave yourself a chance. I think that is one of the best things to do is to primarily go to have fun, go to meet people, and go to learn stuff about the game. And when I go to an Archon tournament, I think my lifetime Archon record is like 500. I think I'm exactly dead even in Archon events. I may have done worse at PAX. I don't remember, but I think I ended up at like the 50-50 mark. At PAX, I may have gone 2-4. I don't actually remember. But the deck to play in an Archon event to pick, I would say, is the one that you think is the best, that you're the most comfortable with, the one you have the most reps with. I think that's the best example, or the best deck to choose. Is the one that you've got the most reps with. So yeah. Beyond that, I think making sure you've played the set, if it's a sealed event, if it's an Archon event, really you could think of like a cheat sheet of cards to look out for in Archon. Getting familiar with some of the more powerful combos in the game. That's good information. Getting some reps in, but at the same time, don't burn yourself out before you get to the tournament, because there's nothing quite like mental fatigue at a tournament. And if you show up fresh and you're playing, you'll wear off pretty quickly. So do all the things that normal, successful, healthy people do, like getting a full night of sleep, eating breakfast, all that stuff. I think really helps. So yeah, that's all. Those are all things that I would make sure I do before I played in a tournament. If you had to take a mass mutation deck to a vault tour, what archetype would I choose? I would choose one of the faster decks. Absolutely. Mass mutation is a set that I think you really want the quick decks. I don't think I would take an intensive creature heavy deck because I think while you'll take some people by surprise, I don't think you'll beat the best decks. I think they'll have answers to your boards. So I would make sure you take one of the really fast mass mutation decks. I would probably take a mass mutation shadows deck, one that had rad pennies and bow knithings in it, just because their comeback potential is very, very powerful, and it would likely have logos in it as well. So yeah, probably a logo shadows deck of some kind. Ideally, you'd get like a Dis thrown in there, something like a Mr. Jack Feet. If I were to play in a 3-deck survival, what 3 decks would I bring, and what order would I put them in, and why? Okay, so if I were to play in one tomorrow, I would bring Confage, and I would put that first, because as long as Confage is running hot, this deck cannot be beaten. And then once Confage has lost, then I know I am ready to move on to another deck. So Confage is a deck that can draw really hot or really cold, and I'd want to make sure that I'd start with this deck knowing that it's not going to be there at the end for me, but it can do some pretty amazing things for me, and it can win some games. So It's not going to win every game, but it can be a fast deck. So yeah, the comp phage I would put in the pole position there, just because it's a very potent deck, if not consistent. Fugitive Adler, on the other hand, is a very consistent deck. It was this was our I believe our deck that won our Mass Mutations tournament. I would play with this deck second, because it is a very very fast deck that generates a lot of amber. So I would make sure that this deck would come up in the second position, because it's going to behave roughly the same every game. And so that's my goal there, is to play a fairly consistent deck that is good at stealing amber. And then finally, in third, I would play Ardreth Burning Forest Enemy. This is a slower deck. However, this is a very methodical deck. When my back is against the wall, I want a deck like Ardreth because of its never say die attitude. There are this deck. I would want to play this deck the least, hopefully. This deck is extremely methodical. I wouldn't want to spend my whole day playing this deck, so that's why I would put it in the third position. Yeah, each of these decks has roughly different strategies. Ardreth is more of a classical control deck, and Comp Phage is more of a combo deck. So I think having those combination of decks in Fugitive is just like a rush deck. So having 3 different styles, I think, is welcome. Honestly, different people are going to put different decks in different positions. So I would just make sure I bring a very good deck with like a very linear strategy in each of my positions, and then try to keep them varied, so that way I don't get bored. You could bring decks that are very similar, and so that way you don't feel like you're making play mistakes. However, I think if you have a fairly extensive collection, I think having different decks of different styles would be welcome at a survival tournament. So what advice would I give for someone attending their first organized competitive Keyforge event? Specific advice depending on the format. So I kind of covered that on the first question. If you're going to your very first event, the biggest advice is to go there to have fun. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because there are going to be other people that are going to that event that are going to be new to the game. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk to the tournament organizers. They're all very nice. From my experience, the tournament organizers are saints. They have to put up with players all day, and they would rather put up with people who don't know what they're doing than people who are being mean to them. So tiebreak rules, Artboy points out, the tiebreak rules are a way to lose the game. They suck. Tiebreak rules need to be overhauled so many different times, but they haven't been. Know the tiebreak rules; they can be kind of a drag. So, but yeah, knowing how the tiebreaks work is pretty important. Do I think Vault Warrior will ever happen? If so, do I think it will be successful? I am not convinced. So here's what happens. The World Championships will happen sometime next year, hopefully, in May. Right? Hopefully. There's a big asterisk right there, because we don't know that they're going to happen necessarily. They've said that it'll happen, but we don't know. Hopefully, Worlds happens next year. And then, hopefully, Vault Warriors will happen. Delayed 2-3 years or whatever. But ideally, that is what happens, is that Vault Warrior shows up after at 2 years after it was supposed to. Do I think that is likely to happen? I think if Worlds happens and Worlds is an unmitigated disaster, then I do not think Vault Warriors happens. If I think Worlds happens and is a success, then Vault Warriors will likely happen. I think I'm kind of copping out of that answer. I'm not really coming down with like a firm answer one way or another. I think the most likely event is that Vault Warriors never sees the light of day. I think that is the most likely event, honestly. So, and then if Vault Warriors does happen, would it be successful? So yeah, I could see like 2 Vault Warrior tournaments happening and then the rest getting canceled. I could see something like that happening. I don't know. I don't know what you want to call that phenomenon, but you might call it the whatever the most disappointing event to occur is the most likely when it comes to Keyforge, I think. Yeah, so but that money, so I think it is. I think the issue is $1 million. $1 million development money doesn't get you as much as you think it would for a computer project, and I think that is a harsh reality that people don't want to face. $1 million, like, do you Airbnb? I think was a $2 billion project or something along those lines, right? Like it was something like the initial launch of Airbnb. Like, people do not realize how expensive software is. So yeah, you hear $1 million and you're like, okay, yeah, we can get some stuff for $1 million. But man, if I had $1 million for a startup, we'd fold in 4 months, right? Like, yeah, I just don't. I don't see an official client coming fast enough to save the game. So, do you think that personal set and playstyle shift the meta over, say, someone playing their best deck? So, I do think it is easy to chase trends in Keyforge. You get beat by some deck, and you're like Infernus, I think, is a good example. You get Infernus 10 times in a game, and you're like, man, Infernus sucks to play against. I better play an Infernus deck. I think it's easy to chase trends, and you can go find some decks that are kind of similar. I think one of our best examples was the 4 Infernus deck, and that deck is garbage because the rest of the deck isn't functional, right? That sucks, Art Boy. Yeah, but I don't think that's like, if you look at the COVID cases, those numbers are going up, and so yeah. So I think, but the thing is, Infernus decks, without the proper board control, lose to decks that are good at controlling the board, or decks that just don't have a lot of amber pips in the first place, right? I think combo decks are particularly good against specific styles of combo decks. Brobnar, I think, is pretty good against Infernus decks, right? Something about just like 4 gigantic creatures on the board, being able to fight whatever off the table and then reap and stuff like that. That's all good news. You want stuff like that out. So, but yeah, I think there's an amount of trend chasing in Keyforge. Mass Mutations, Rad Penny has a card that's particularly good against Infernus decks. So if they purge, there's like almost no situation in which Rad Penny will ever get purged. And so if they purge your deck down to just Rad Pennies, they're gonna have a hard time beating you. So that's something to keep in mind. You can find some decks that are good against Infernus. It may take some digging, it may take some play testing, it may take some just alternating the way, like changing the way you play. The less you draw and play against an Infernus deck, the less they have to actually purge, right? Most of them aren't milling you. You're choosing to play cards that will get destroyed or or purged by Infernus. So yeah, 10 dinos, I could see that. I could see Star Alliance being pretty good against Infernuses too. If you've got the right mix of creatures, a card like Information Officer Gray will make it so that your hand is efficient. You can set up a fairly large archive. Decks that are good at generating very gigantic turns are pretty good against Infernus, because you'll create a turn that is very difficult for your opponent to answer. Key cheats are good against Infernus. It's the same thing as like against stealing. If you got a deck that's really good at key cheats, those are good against Infernus. You forge your key, and then they can purge stuff. That's fine. You're not losing the amber. That's the important thing. Stopping the amber loss. That's the important thing. So, okay. So Keyforge Future. What do you think is the most important thing Fantasy Flight needs to achieve with the next Keyforge set? With the next set, I don't know. I think they always need to, from this point forward, they always need to make sure that they rotate houses. So that there is never a house combination that's ever been printed before. I think that's easy to do. So as long as they keep making sure they rotate houses, that's important. And as long as they introduce some sort of gimmick on top of the gimmick already, and as much as I feel like the tide was a near miss. It was almost a hit, but I think the tide is near miss, and I feel like it's like playtest numbers. And I was thinking, honestly, how many cards that refer to the tide on them, that like take the tide, how many of those cards should just take the tide and then also do the thing that they say they do? And I think if you change a lot of those cards to grab the tide, and still do the full effect of the card, something like cross porpoises, for instance, since it enrages two creatures and raise the tide, you still get full value, right? I think if you had more cards like that, then I think Dark Tidings gets a little bit better, and you could possibly lower the chain to like 2 instead of 3, because it feels like 3 is very punishing. 3 doesn't feel punishing, or didn't feel that punishing when we were talking about it initially. We're like, we'll just play 3 chains, or pay 3 chains for it. But as we play test, the 3 chains is backbreaking, and it's so much worse on the decks that don't have efficiency. There's not enough efficiency to go around in this set. Saurians have no efficiency outside of like the road. Star Alliance has got good efficiency, which is why it feels great to play in this set. Logos, efficient, great, feels great to play in this set. Untamed, you got some efficiency. You got ways to sack creatures and draw cards. You got ways to pull stuff back from your discard pile. But Unfathomable, no efficiency. The Sanctum, not really any efficiency. You can light Everlasting a creature back, right? So there's like ways to interact with other stuff, but you need that efficiency, I think, to balance out the card loss from the chains, to really make the tide feel good. So I think there needs to be more playtesting done. From what I hear through the grapevine, the playtesting isn't the greatest for FFG, and so I think more playtesting needs to get done, and I don't know how to change that at this point, because it's very likely the next set, if it does get printed and released within the next few months, would that set be any more playtested than, say, Dark Tidings? Unlikely. You know, like, I don't see what would have changed to make that set more playtested. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like you need a more playtested game. So my hopes for organized play would be that Void Warriors happens and it is successful. I kind of hope that it does, because I feel like one of the, you're never gonna have like the spikes from Magic want to play Keyforge until money is involved, and so I think having like a circuit of large cash money tournaments would be good to bring a certain type of player into the game. Now, whether or not we would want those players in the game long term, that's a whole other question. But I think you need something big in organized play. Honestly, if they could just worlds, if they keep doing interesting formats with worlds, like for instance the 4 world champion thing, where you've got teams and one team is the worlds, and you've got individuals from teams that didn't make the cut, play, and then have like an individual tournament. That's a great idea. Like they could probably stand to do more wacky stuff, and honestly, you could make Vault Warriors wacky, and that might be enough to discourage the stereotypical guy who's cheating at the card game from trying to play in the tournament, because the tournament's wacky, and you can't cheat your way to victory in like a reversal tournament, right? So if that might be a better way for organized play to be handled, is to put less reliance on, say, Archon, and put more reliance on the wacky format. So it'd be real interesting if they adapted some of the fan formats, right? They made them official. That'd be awesome. I'd love to see it. I think that's extremely unlikely at this point, but I'd love to see it. That'd be really cool. At this point, I don't know what they've got to lose, so they may as well take fan formats. So, and what we'd like to see from Keyforge in the future, honestly, I think one of the most important things Keyforge could print, that would be the best for the game, would be for them to print the cooperative decks. They need to print all of the cooperative stuff and have it available in stores. You could probably even make a set be exclusively cooperative. Right, you buy the cooperative set and it comes with some decks, and you can buy the decks off on the side and stuff like that. I think that would get so many people into the game, because then you have that cooperative CCG group get into the game, and then maybe they go play some competitive stuff. If they don't, it's no big deal. You just need people in the game and playing, and they'll go explore the other aspects of the game when they feel like it. And if they're only there to play the cooperative stuff, no big deal. You at least have people who are supporting the game in some fashion or another. So I'd love to see the cooperative products make it to the shelf. I'd love to see them really explore those formats. I think those are potentially some of the best things that have occurred to Keyforge, especially in the last year. Yeah, that's what I really love to see, is that that cooperative model really get pushed. So, all right, so general gaming questions. These were not specifically related to Keyforge. I was gonna go through these as well. With some deluxe, have you noticed with failed games that seem the most common? Now, I think it depends on the era. If you look at the 90s card games, it was because it was the Wild West and the market was saturated. And many of these games had fundamental design issues. Now, as we move forward, we have to redefine what the word failed means. For instance, the Legend of the Five Rings card game. Would we say that the Legends of the Five Rings LCG was a failure? I would argue that it was not a failure, because I think FFG, when they make an LCG, they know there's a lifespan on it, and they're going to get as much money from that as that they can, because they have to have looked at the numbers from their other games that have eventually died off. Destiny, while it wasn't an LCG, but Destiny, they probably had something similar. They knew sales for the game were probably on a downward trend. The Star Wars LCG, Game of Thrones, Android, they have to have numbers from those games. Now, there were some extenuating circumstances to both Android and Conquest, right? Because I believe both of those games were canceled due to licensing. they have to know that there's a date, there's a timer attached to all of these games, and as long as they print the games and they sell and they're profitable, Fantasy Flight probably views them as a success, while the community may view them as a failure because they're not being published anymore, right? So I think recent games, we have to talk about failures, and I think if we talk about recently failed games, we're going to end up talking about primarily LCGs, and then like attaching Destiny to that as well, right? Um, so yeah, it seems like LCGs, it's impossible to get new people into the game if the game it didn't just come out. I remember when L5R was coming out, I was able to get a bunch of people into the game because it's like, man, this game's going to be good. It's Fantasy Flight. They're making an LCG. It's L5R. It's a proven property. You get it on the ground floor. And then 6 months later, half the people that are playing the game just didn't keep up with it, right? So, yeah, especially the competitive ones. I mean, how long has Lord of the Rings been out? It's cooperative. It's an LCG. It's cooperative. Still coming out, right? Why? Because you have people who want to go back and get all this stuff for the game. It doesn't feel like you're missing anything. You play the game as you want, right? I think that's one of the big issues for CCGs. I think the competitive CCG player demographic is aging, right? It's so much harder to keep up with a competitive CCG. Now, I mean, COVID notwithstanding, but even before that, right? Like when I started working at the bank, I did not have time to keep up with Magic, and that was part of the reason why I stopped keeping up with Magic, because I wasn't able to keep up with the I wasn't able to keep playing in like Friday Night Magics and stuff like that, because if I ended up working on a Friday night, like I missed Magic that week, right? So yeah, when I started working, I cannot imagine. I don't have kids, right? Like I can't imagine what having kids would do to playing card games. Card games. The time I played the most games was when I was working. I hadn't moved. It was before I worked at the bank. I had finished up my degree and I was tutoring. So I had a part-time job tutoring accounting at the local tech school. Worked 2 days a week. And I spent the rest of the week gaming. And I was like, I had this ridiculous schedule. This completely absurd schedule. It was like Mondays I played RPGs. On Tuesdays I played like War Machine. On Wednesdays I played Race for the Galaxy with a buddy. That's when new comics came out as well, so I'd get the new comics. We'd play some Race for the Galaxy. Thursdays with like I spent some time. I think I was playing WoW at the time, so I spent some time raiding. On Friday mornings, I would play the Star Wars LCG with a friend, like the one person locally who played it. And then Friday nights were Magic, and then Saturday, I did some other type of game. I had like a full week planned of gaming, and because I was working part time, I worked like 16 hours a week or whatever, while I was looking for a full time job, and I was like super competitive at a lot of stuff. Saturdays was like my travel to a tournament day. Like if there was a big tournament of one of those games that I was playing, I'd go travel to it. And that was like a rigorous. That's like an Olympian style training regimen, right? Like where you're playing all these different types of games. So, um, yeah, it's pretty funny, squirrel. Yeah, exactly, right? It's Keyforge. The deck building is the no deck building is a plus, right? You pick a deck out of the box and you play it, right? You don't have to. You look at the deck list. You're like, which deck is this? Okay, let's go. Let's play. Right? You didn't have to put the deck together. It was pretty built for you. So, Okay, so what's the most unique issue you've seen kill a game? All right, so I actually meant to look this game up. Now I'm going to start by telling you a story so that I can answer this question. All right. So, if we go back in time, there was a game that came out called MLB Showdown. And I believe it was a Wizards of the Coast game, and it was their baseball card game. And so the way MLB Showdown worked, you played baseball, and you had a so MLB Showdown, I think that was the name of the game. I'm gonna look it up real quick, and I'm gonna look it up in a tab that is not on the screen in case I look up the wrong thing. Okay, yeah, MLB Showdown. Yeah, there we go. This is okay. So, yeah. All right. So you can't. It's kind of hidden by chat here, and I've got it kind of hidden by But this is what the cards looked like. It had a baseball player, and then right here was a list of if you can see where the mouse is. This was your pitcher, and then like this was your hitter or stuff like that. And so you had like this complex system where you would roll. Each of you would roll a d20, and that would determine how well your player did. Okay. So MLB Showdown was actually a blast of a game. It was really fun, and because you're rolling d20s, anything can happen. So a friend of mine, whose name is John, played this game, and if your die rolled too many 20s against him, what he would do is he would take your die, he would go to the door of the comic store that we played at. He would launch your die across the parking lot. He would just throw it into the street, and then he'd go up to the counter. He would buy a new die. He'd come back to the table and he'd give you the die, and then he'd continue playing because he felt like you were cheating if you rolled too many 20s against him. So yeah, I told you that story about MLB Showdown to tell you about the game called NFL Showdown. All right. So NFL Showdown was trying to cash in on the MLB Showdown success. Because MLB Showdown did all right when it came out. It didn't like smash records or anything like that, but it did well enough to limp along for like another year or so. And so Wizards thought they could cash in on that success and make a game called NFL Showdown. And you couldn't roll d20s in NFL Showdown. There was actually this separate computer component that would determine the success of your play. So you would pick a play. You're like, you would say like shotgun hike to the quarterback, slant run, toss to the tight end kind of thing. Yeah, so you would like pick your play, and you'd pick your key players, and you would scan all that into the computer, and the computer would determine what happened. And so it was a neat idea. Now, here's the issue. When you're making a card game, what do you do to the most valuable cards in the game? What do you do to a card to make it more valuable in a card game? You foil it. Okay. Do you know what happens to a foil card when you try to scan it into the computer? It can't read it. So the best players in NFL Showdown were printed on cardstock that could not be read by the computer you needed to play the game, because there was no way to manually determine what happened to the plays. So and let me look up when this game came out. I want to say it was like 2000. NFL Showdown. Looks like it was printed in 2003. Okay. So 2003. All right. So you've got like early Peyton Manning, early Tom Brady. So like imagine you want to play like your favorite Ninja Dance Matt. Hey, how's it going? Imagine you want to play your favorite football player in the game and they don't work. They don't do anything. The game doesn't work. That to me is the funniest example of a game failing, of a game just flat out fail. Mechanically did not function. How do you get to the point where you print something that does not work? It ends up in the hands of the consumer, and you basically have to play like everybody's second string. Like imagine having to play like the 25th best quarterback in the NFL, right? Like that is who you have to play in the game for it to even function. So yeah, I think that is the best failure in the history of card games. And there's a lot of failures in the card game in the card game history that are funny. So yeah. Okay. So did I learn anything worth mentioning from collecting Magic cards, then ultimately selling them? So if I've learned anything, is that money is an arbitrary concept. The items only have the value we ascribe to them. For instance, I can show you right now something I keep on my desk. This is a beta Birds of Paradise. In the event of a house fire, I would grab this and then flee from the house. I keep it right there. Now I bought that Birds of Paradise. I actually traded a full booster box at the time for that beta Birds of Paradise. And if we go price check a beta Birds of Paradise right now, it's probably an actual insane value. Let's see. It's the last time I checked, it was like actually absurd. Yeah, so right in the $2,000 range. Yeah, so I with my employee discount bought a booster box and traded somebody for that card. And this one is actually I don't know if you saw the markings on it. This is actually signed by Mark Poole. So signatures, for as far as value goes, it's sometimes it'll add, sometimes it won't. Yeah, so that's what I've learned from trading Magic cards, is that value is arbitrary. Money is arbitrary. Money is actually kind of a dumb system for us to run things, right? So in the UK, the most recent set of Keyforge is more expensive than any of the other. I wonder if this has anything to do with the more limited print runs from FFGs. Yeah. So I think it's probably more of an availability issue with the latest set. I'm willing to bet that they severely cut their numbers across the board for Dark Tidings. I imagine they've probably cut their numbers for every set that's been printed. Yeah, I don't know. I think they got bit by AOA. Or at least FFG did. So, yeah, it's in like Dark Tide. And there's a number of things that go into like the price of a card, right? That's the availability of it and the demand for it. You know, there's all kinds of. So yeah, my time trading Magic cards. Honestly, trading and selling Magic cards, as far as time investment went, was probably the most lucrative thing I've ever done with my life. And to me, having saying that as a factual sentence, as like objectively, if I sit down and think and math out how much time I've spent and how much money I've gotten from doing things, I'm willing to bet that selling Magic cards was worth way more to me than say getting like an accounting degree, right? Yeah, Age of Ascension, I think because the first set of Keyforge was insanely popular, went through multiple printings. I think they were ready for Age of Ascension to absolutely crush. And then when they printed Age of Ascension and people started playing it, they were like, this is worse than the first set. I'm going to go back to buying the first set. I don't think they were ready for that. And I think has basically screwed up their numbers ever since. So, yeah. All right, so if I could recommend one card game in print aside from Keyforge, what would it be? I really like Marvel Champions if you're looking for a cooperative game to play. Now, if you're looking for a competitive game, I do not recommend playing competitive CCGs from a collectible aspect. I just don't recommend that as a practice. If you are looking for the competitive CCG experience, I would just recommend Legends of Runeterra, because that game is essentially free to play. And you don't have to spend any time whatsoever collecting cards. You just play, game or two a day, complete your quests, and you'll get the whole set for free eventually. And you can play the most competitive decks in that game, and that'll scratch that itch if you're looking for that. Magic, to me, I could easily turn the rest of this into me talking about where Magic went astray. And it's just an old CCG player ranting at the cloud at that point, right? There's some stuff in there, but it doesn't do enough for me. Magic, personally. So yeah, if you want that in-person play, honestly, I get more enjoyment from playing cooperative games than I do from playing competitive game these days, and that's because I think you need a very specific mindset to have fun with a competitive game. So. What is my opinion on the state of tabletop gaming in the Kickstarter social media era? Now, I think this is an interesting question, and this is probably the closest that I'm going to get to like a political rant, specifically for the purposes of tonight's discussion. So, yeah, I really enjoy Loader too. The big problem with Loader is the price tag compared to Marvel, and probably also the source material. I think you could hand Marvel to like to somebody who's relatively new to gaming, and they'll attach right to it. And you could probably hand Marvel to like a younger audience. You could hand Marvel to like a 13-year-old, right? And they could probably have fun with it, assuming they're not attached to an electronic device at the time. But the Lord of the Rings game is like a gamer's game. There's a lot of mechanics that are going on, and it is like the book lore, and it's like ripping stuff out of the Silmarillion and all that, right? And so if you're like a Tolkien person who also enjoys board gaming, then Loader is like right there. It is a good, fun, like it's got everything you want from it. But I think that makes it even more niche. So all right, anyway, sorry, back to my Kickstarter social media era. So there are so I think Kickstarter itself is a net positive for gaming. There's plenty of bad Kickstarter stories. There's plenty of good Kickstarter stories. There's some that are successful, and there are some that take years to deliver their product, and there are some that never really deliver what they were supposed to, right? Now, social media and board gaming, I think, is an interesting mix, because if you look at some of the recent controversies in board gaming, you could become very weary of it very quickly. You're like, we're just playing board games. What's the problem here, right? And you have to like critically think about the board games that you're playing, to really like understand why some people take an issue with some of the games as they've been printed over the years. I think that's part of the reason why Keyforge has been successful, is because you're not fighting each other necessarily. You can certainly fight in the game, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to generate an engine, and win that way. So if you're somebody who just wants to play like dust pixies and generate keys and stuff like that, you can do that. You can have a deck that's very bad at fighting but still be a very good deck. And so board gaming has been like this sort of gated community from a lot of like there's a reason why the comic book guy from The Simpsons rings so true for so long, is because there's a very like stereotypical type of person that was the board gamer, right? If you go to a war game tournament, if you go to like a Warhammer, an Age of Sigmar, a 40K style tournament, there is a very specific demographic of person that plays that style of game, that enjoys it, and it can be kind of a hostile community to get into. Magic players, Yu-Gi-Oh players, same kind of thing, where I remember when people would describe to me the conditions at a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament, like how rampant thievery was, and like all kinds of other shenanigans that would happen at a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament, and I'd be like, man, like this sounds like a bazaar. This sounds like this sounds like the cantina from Star Wars, right? Like I feel like I'm gonna walk in and have to shoot somebody, just to let people know where I stand, just because it's so hostile. It just doesn't make any sense. The only person I have ever actually threatened with violence in my life was a Yu-Gi-Oh player, and the guy was kind of being a smartass about it. And the dude, this is when I was selling Magic cards, and I had a binder, and if somebody and it was like the trade binder effectively, and I basically said, like this is the it does depend on your local store, but now this was years ago, and a lot has changed then, and I'm trying to like make my point by showing how much has changed. So I had a binder that had like a lot of like valuable stuff in it, and it was the binder I kind of traded out of with people, and I carried it with me, the binder at the time was probably like $1,000 worth of cards, maybe $1,500 worth of cards. It was pretty expensive. I didn't keep all like my best stuff in it, but there was a lot of like staples and stuff like that. The guy was kind of being a smart ass, and he was like, what would you do if I took this binder and just ran out the door? He was just kind of like joking around, and I was like, I don't know. What do you think somebody with a concealed weapons permit would do in that situation? And he was like, you don't have a gun on you. And I was like, are you willing to risk your life over that? And because it was one of those things where I was like, what do you think is going to happen, dude? Like you're trying to, you're trying to push, you're trying to make a point, you're trying to be edgy or something like that. And I'm just going to illustrate to you where the line is. From what I've heard, that dude would, you can't, well, yeah, I understand that, right, I was a very different person at the time, but that was one of those things. It was one of those things. Yeah, I just whether or not it is legal, right? That is the that's the issue. But that's the right, exactly. How much trouble do I get in afterwards? And it's probably a lot of trouble, right? But that was that was one of those things where I was just kind of like where do you want to go with this, man? Like don't threaten to steal stuff from me, because I don't want to be that person. You know, from what I understood, he stole cards. He wasn't necessarily the person that stole cards. He was like he was like Fagin. He had like his thieves that worked for him and would bring him stuff, and he didn't really ask where it came from, and you know, he would turn around and make a profit off of it and stuff like that. The Yu-Gi-Oh community locally was so bad, and it was like, I'm talking like it was like a tri-county area. All of the Yu-Gi-Oh players would just steal cards from each other all the time, and when you were like the ringleader for that kind of stuff, you just had to put up with it. Or sorry, when you were like a store employee, you had to actually put up with it, and it was just so annoying. And it's just like, stop stealing from each other, stop threatening to steal from each other. You know, like, I don't want to have to deal with this. You're so yeah. So yeah, it was such an annoying thing, and that's literally the only person I have ever threatened with physical violence in a gaming space. Now, I say that because there are people who use physical threats as the norm. I don't know if I ever told you guys about the his local nickname was the Yu-Gi-Oh Nazi. I don't think I've ever told this story on stream. But he was the dude. So here's the problem with collectibles. The problem with collectibles, if a collectible is stolen and the collectible is worth $100, the police show up and they say, "Well, stolen," and you're like, "A magic card." And like, "And what's the value of this?" And you're like, $100. And they put that down on a piece of paper, and then they walk away. They take some statements from some local people, and then you never see them again, because they don't care. They do not give a shit. Exactly. Right. Trying to explain it. Now, the only time I ever saw the police get involved locally with a theft of like actual collectible property was when somebody stole comic books from a police officer, and they set up a sting operation because the person stole from a police officer not knowing it was a police officer. Okay, that was the only time the police ever got involved locally. Another situation that happened at the store that I worked at was there was like a local gang of some sort, and the city that I grew up in, Anderson, in South Carolina, had I want to say a gang problem. The police don't, in the police definition, it was a gang. I think it was just like a group of people. But one of their initiation things was like having people go beat up somebody unprovoked. So there were two dudes who camped out in front of the store, of the comic book store. I didn't see who they were. They were relatively younger, and so I thought they were like Yu-Gi-Oh players. And one of our regular customers was walking in to get his comics for the week, and these two dudes just jump on him, wail on him for about like 2 minutes and leave. And I see it go down, and I'm like, what's going on outside? I don't step out for anything because I thought it was like Yu-Gi-Oh players hashing it out over their stolen cards. I was like, whatever, right? Like somebody stole cards from somebody and they're beating them up in the parking lot. It's not happening inside the store. I don't have to clean it up. And when the guy gets up to get in the store, it was like a regular customer. And I was like, oh shit, what the fuck happened? You know? And he was like, I don't know who those guys are. I was like, I've never seen them before either. I thought they were like Yu-Gi-Oh players. They had the look of Yu-Gi-Oh players. So I call the police. The police show up. They take her statements. Never hear anything about it again. Because like I managed to get outside and I couldn't get my phone ready fast enough to take a picture of their car as they left, because they parked in such a way that they could actually leave very quickly. I didn't see where they parked initially, but it was like I still remember to this day, it was like a blue Bronco or something like that. It was like a blue SUV from the late 90s. But I didn't catch the license plate number because I went to like Junior Detective and go track them down. And it was a crazy happening. And I was like talking to the police and I was like, just out of curiosity, if I see two guys attacking this dude and I think that guy's life in trouble, am I allowed to shoot them in that case? And the police officer looked at me and said, did you say those guys were unarmed? And I was like, yeah, they were unarmed. And they're like, well, here's the thing. Here's what the headline's going to read. It's like, local man shoots unarmed teenagers. And that's what the headline's going to read. Do you think people would convict you and that kind of thing? And I was like, well, all right, well, fair enough. I was like, all right, that's all I need to know. And it's not a matter of like what's right or wrong in that instance. That dude's life could have been in danger. I mean, hey, Ultra Gecko, what's up? They were beating the shit out of that guy. Now he ended up with just like some bruises, and I think they broke his glasses, but I don't think he ended up anything broken, nothing superficial, or everything just superficial wounds and stuff like that. It was probably sore for a couple of days. The guy ended up being okay, and he ended up coming in later. The thing was the local, he worked at the local pizza shop that on Friday nights after Magic, I would stop by that pizza store. He worked there, and so it was like a dude I talked to. Yeah. Well, so it's yeah, exactly. It is a cultural difference. And like I said, I was a different person then. I have a very different opinion on guns now. Yeah, no, I have a completely different opinion on guns. Fast forward, this was about 10 years ago that story happened. It's just right. It's not like I can absolutely see the cultural difference, right? I was like real big into concealed weapons at the time, and now I am not. I do not go to that initially, and I think it's because I do not carry a weapon anymore. I do not feel the need for it. I think you can convince yourself that you do need one, and you can convince yourself that the world is a dangerous place. And when you watch somebody get the shit beaten out of them in front of you, you can convince yourself that you need a gun, because you don't know if that's going to be you next, right? Like what was just an isolated event never happened again, never happened before. I'd worked at the store for 11 years before an event like that had ever occurred, right? So you're talking about a literal once in a decade event can happen. But that was one of those things that just like, it felt to me like I had made the right decision at the time. But looking back on it, completely an isolated event, something completely crazy that happened. The dogs are losing their minds. All right, anyway, sorry. So I say all that, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I say all of that to say that I do not hide the person that I have been. I may not necessarily talk about it. I may not talk about it first and foremost, but I don't hide the person that I was. And I don't shy away from controversy. I'll lean into it to talk about it. There's a lot of gatekeeping that had been the norm in card games and the hobbies. So The dogs are losing their minds. Absolutely losing their minds. So the problem is that yeah, social media is the Yugi players. No. So I'm saying that there was like a particular style of thought that dominated gaming a decade ago, 15 years ago, and had been the norm for a long time. Yeah. So right. Yeah. Well, I was not the shop owner. I was just like the manager at the time, and yeah. So a guy that I know that came into the store, worked at a gas station, was held up at gunpoint. You know, and like I said, it's one of those events that you can convince yourself you need a weapon. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. So yeah, and I'm from the South too. You got to keep that in mind. I am from a different world. Now I think a lot of that line of thought is kind of flawed ultimately. So, but yeah, that's probably a topic for a different day. So, steer clear of those gas stations. I used to think there were like parts of town I wasn't supposed to go to. So, oh yeah. Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi. Okay, Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi is a much better story. All right, so Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi. Here's the thing. He was a Marine who was dishonorably discharged. Well, I did not know he was dishonorably discharged, but he was a Marine who was dishonorably discharged. And he was the definition of a toxic player. He was if he was losing, he would just start insulting you personally, and he so much of his worldview was wrapped up in his success at the game that he would just turn toxic at a moment's notice, and he was just generally really unpleasant to be around, like even in the same room, right? Because yes, dogs. He was not pleasant to be in the same room, because if he's losing across the room, you're hearing about it. Because he can't help himself but not yell. He would say stuff like, "You're pissing off the wrong ex-Marine, buddy," and stuff like that. It was just like stuff like anyway. So he played in our store locally because he was like trying to get a group together for various games and whatnot. I did this story is complete hearsay. All right, so this did not happen in the store I worked at. I had to hear about it, so this is a complete word of mouth type story. But he was playing at this other local store, and he was like a jerk to some dude's kid, and the guy was a cop. Okay. And so what he did is he actually learned to play the game, and then had somebody give him like a combo deck at the time. And the way the combo had like a bunch of moving pieces, but it's one of those things is like where once the combo starts, you can't lose. You just have to like play all the cards in the right order, and then you eventually win. And so they taught the guy to play the game. They paired him versus the Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi in the tournament intentionally. They set the Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi up, and so the cop goes into the combo. He assembles the combo, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi is like, yeah, you got the combo, you win. And he's like, no. The guy's like, no. I'm still new to this. I got to make sure I'm doing the thing right. And he's like playing all the cards like slow and like making sure he's got stuff right. And he slow rolls the win, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Nazi loses it and like punches the guy, which is an insane reaction to have anyway. There's nothing stopping you from just scooping or whatever, right? And just you got it. No need to go any further. Let's just sign the paper and move on. He punches the dude, and the guy's like, "You just assaulted a police officer," and took him to jail. I don't know how long he was in jail, but that was one of those, like, I heard about that story. I was like, "Damn, dude!" Like, they set the dude up. They set him up. The Yu-Gi-Oh Nazi took the fall. Yeah, it was it was a crazy, crazy story to hear about. So yeah, exactly. That is my yeah. Yeah, exactly. It was one of the, like, that it was not connections that I had put together at the time, but like years later I was like, no, wait a second. The only time the cops got involved locally was when the cops themselves were inconvenienced by actions. Yeah. Anyway, so you had, when back to the Kickstarter social media thing. Now that I've gone on now that I've gone on a side tangent. That world does not exist anymore. Not in the same way that it did. There are places, there are bastions of that card gaming store that the dingy, not well lit, those stores still exist, and you still have those stereotypical gamers, and they can be hostile, and um and what has happened is that, like, the front line of the culture war, the greater culture war, has shifted into the hobby area. And so some of those stereotypical gamer guys that are like at gatekeeping and stuff like that, now make gaming about, like, PC culture and stuff like that, right? Like, that's they're like, you know, games used to be really awesome until you had, like, all these absurd games get printed, you know, because you have games, you have games that are like fighting against, like, the way games have always been made. You know, like, war games have always been about fighting one army against another. And you have like a generation of players who just have no interest in games which your primary route to victory is vanquishing an opponent. You have people who want to play artistic games and they want to do interesting things. You have people who want to, like, tell a story through a board game. You have a lot of really like games can be so much more diverse than what they had been for so long. You have, like, this clash of, like, cultures and ideas that kind of are, like, happening in the board game space that are exacerbated by social media, because it feels like any sort of, like, any sort of cultural conversation that happens to be occurring at a given time will find its way filtering down into places that people try to escape from a lot of that reality from. And gaming has traditionally been one of those escapes for a lot of people. So you have people who, like, Board Game Geek as a website that's gone through a lot of, like, turmoil recently, where, you know, you'll have, like, a creator of a game say something that's relatively insensitive, and then people are like, I don't think you should have said that, and then it'll kind of escalate from there, because people have no way, for whatever reason, on social media, people can't just put the brakes on something. They'll get something, they'll get them really mad, and then they'll start making personal attacks, and you have just this escalation that occurs, and that kind of stuff can be very off-putting for gaming. Right, yeah. And so, I mean, you could apply this to, like, the recent Blizzard news, right? There's, like, this way things that had always been done in the gaming sphere, that is just no longer acceptable anymore. And whenever something is dying off, it doesn't necessarily go down easy. And so, yeah, I think you're dealing with, like, the death throes of, like, this toxic gamer culture that existed before. And I think people don't understand, like, the gatekeeping, how damaging the gatekeeping mentality for games is for, like, individuals who have that in the long run. You just end up friendless, right? Because and your communities never get bigger, and then people leave games, they never come back into it, right? So but yeah. So, but anyway, I think there's a larger conversation to be had there about like the Kickstarter social media era, um, that I may not be 100% qualified to talk about, but I've been someone who has been um, in the even in this company is dependent on if there's talks shift in toxic workplaces. Anything about more than well, so um yeah, exactly. I think there's I I wouldn't call when I worked at the comic store a toxic work environment, but the thing is, I was working for a small business owner, so his word is law. And if I get screwed over by him as an employee, I have no recourse. And I hired like a good friend of mine while he was finishing up his like masters or whatever, and the owner hated him. And I think the owner was trying to get him to quit because if he quit, he didn't have to pay him um, unemployment, and he just verbally abused the dude and was generally just a piece of shit to him. And he didn't do it in front of me. I would hear about it from the guy later. He'd be like, "Yeah, man, you wouldn't believe the what I had to put up with last night." You know, and then the owner would talk to me about it, and the owner would put a spin on it and stuff like that. And I was just kind of like, "You gotta know the dude. The dude's not gonna lie to me. I know you as the small business owner. I didn't think you were gonna lie to me, but that was until until like I started putting stuff together." And so I think that's the problem with like a lot of small workplaces, especially small businesses. You don't have an option. Like, what's your escalation plan, right? I can't report on him to HR. And after working for larger companies and after like talking to my significant other about working for a large company, all HR is there is to minimize the damage that could occur outside of a company. The HR is not there to actually bring bad managers into line. If you've got a manager that uh, has a vendetta against a specific employee, there's nothing that employee can do. They don't have a recourse. All you can do is hope for a transfer or something, right? So yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of those changes are like changes on paper. They're changes like yeah. But I think it's a larger shift in like the conscious. I think there's the what people found acceptable before they find less acceptable now, and those lines have radically shifted over the years. So okay, uh, that was a bit of a rant one. And that one's not really focused, but I figured that one was going to go off the rails at different points. But yeah. So how has my Keyforge project been going? It hasn't. The new Path of Exile League started, so I started playing that instead of learning any programming. So yeah, that's what's been going on there. I found it hard to really focus on the project even before that. So but I may get back to it at some point. I just gotta get the Path of Exile monkey off my back first, and then I'll be able to maybe get back into this. It's one of those where I've been trying to figure out what I actually want to do with a career from this point forward, because I'm closer to 40 now than I'd like to admit, and I get a feeling that post 40, my chances of career swapping are going to be much more narrow. So I got a feeling that whatever I pick to do in the next couple of years, that's it. I'm going to end up doing that until I retire. And so I'm trying to make sure that I make the right choice. I want to make sure that programming. Yeah, I know. Well, as I said, I'm closer to 40 than I'd care to admit. So now I thought getting closer to 30. That was like what sparked me to get out of the comic store and go do other stuff with my life. I thought that was I was going to run out of room to change careers, but I ended up changing careers a couple of times since then. So I might even change careers a couple times after this. Who knows? And then finally, please rank all the movies in the Alien franchise in preference order. Now, if I'm just sitting down to watch an Aliens film, I'm going to start with Aliens, because that is my favorite of them. I don't necessarily think it is the most artistic of them. I also really like the original Alien. It's been quite some time since I've seen Resurrection. I wonder if it holds up as well. I don't actually remember. I remember enjoying it when I watched it, but I know Joss Whedon was one of the major writers on that film, so I have to wonder if his dialogue holds up after all this time. So I would need to go back and watch Resurrection, and I don't think I ever sat down and watched Covenant all the way through. But I think Prometheus is largely a disappointing film. Mostly because there's some very promising characters in Prometheus, and then much of the rest of the film is very, very stupid. So Alien 3 is a couple of edits away from being a masterpiece. And I think it's because Alien 3 had such a troubled production history. So I've got a feeling I came out of Prometheus going like that film was okay. And I've got a feeling that if I watch Prometheus now, knowing where the film goes, knowing where Prometheus goes, if I watch that film, I'll be like, all of this is stupid. Like, this is a stupid decision. That's a dumb story point. Like the film is very schizophrenic. Apparently, Prometheus went through several rewrites. The original Prometheus script was apparently very, very bad. And so the Prometheus that you saw is like better than it could have been. And I think the problem is that Raised by Wolves. I've not seen Raised by Wolves. So the problem with Prometheus, I guess the problem with like action science fiction films in general is that they all have to devolve into some dumb action scenes at some point or another. And you have and seems like what Prometheus would have been. Okay, I'll have to check into Raised by Wolves. Yeah, so Prometheus, like, the original Alien film is like this masterpiece of horror, of body horror too, right? And you're trapped on like the science fiction in that film, is used correctly, right? Like the science fiction is the setting, and you realize you're trapped on a spaceship with something that's intent on killing you, and you know, like it's such like a beautiful, just terrifying film for a lot of reasons. It built suspense very well. And you know, the Aliens is just, it's a big action flick. There's still terror there. The scene with Ripley and Newt, and they're trapped in the med lab with the face huggers. That scene, when I was young, I saw that scene earlier. What in like, I was probably like 12 or something like that when I watched Aliens originally. That scene is so tense and so horrifying. And despite the film being very, very dark, like, you know, the dark serves the film, and keeps things like concealed from you on purpose. And it's one of those where it's like when things start moving in the shadows, that's when you realize that things are wrong. You know, so so there's like all these like lessons that you can learn from these classic horror films. And when you get to something like Prometheus, and it's you've got these magnificent landscapes and like this cool dead alien ship, and you've got all this stuff, um you and then your characters start talking to each other, and the words they say to each other are very dumb. That is to me like the biggest flaw. There's no heart in a film like Prometheus, that's there in the earlier Alien films. And Alien 3 is a film that has a very like it's a very pessimistic film. um like you're on a prison planet. These are all people that were sent here to die. They all have shaved heads. They're basically all interchangeable with each other. um and and then you have like Charles S. Dutton like just like quoting scripture at you like the whole time you're watching Alien 3. Yeah, there's like cognitive dissonance that you get while watching Alien 3, where you can see like this really genius film that could have been made, but like production issues and stuff like that kind of get in the way. So the biggest problem is that like Aliens, like you want this hero arc for like Corporal Hicks, right? Like Hicks was the dude. Hicks was barely in there, right? Like he saves, or sorry, he barely escapes. Like most of the people in the film, like it's such a bad result for so many people in that film. Ripley barely gets out. You're like Newt's gonna live and stuff like that. And Alien 3 is like none of those people matter. They're all they died on impact. Don't worry about them. They don't matter, right? So like Alien 3 honestly feels like it was a different film that became an Alien film, and then they just throw Ripley in it because it's an Alien film. When honestly they could have just told a different story with like the prisoners from that planet, and you could have like this really awesome film that wants to talk about like forgiveness, like how we as humans have had a terrible time forgiving people. One of my favorite books is Perdido Street Station, written by China Miéville. It's a very dense novel, but you get to the end of the film, or to the end of the book, and it basically essentially asks you, what does somebody have to do to be forgiven? And I feel like you could have made Alien 3 in such a way where you're asking that question, where it's like, these are all prisoners. These are all like, there are some really despicable people in that are here. Do they deserve what's coming to them? And and so I think you could do some bold, interesting things with Alien 3, and it gets right up to the cusp of doing it, and then but there's like a bunch of like choices, like the final confrontation where they're like chasing the alien through the the tunnels, and they're like trying to chase the alien into like the reactor so they can like melt it and stuff like that. I remember watching it and going like, I'm seeing this thing again. I can't tell any of these characters apart because they all have shaved heads. They're all like, all of these people are replaceable. You haven't really spent any time developing them. They're even more interchangeable than characters normally are in films. So it's like, who was that died? I don't know, some guy. There's only like there's Charles Dance's character, and then there's Charles S. Dutton's character, where those are like the people who are like actually like distinguishable from Ripley, and then everybody else in that film is just like, I can't convince myself to care about them, which is a shame, because you could have made a film where that's the point. Like you should care about these prisoners, because what we do as a society is we throw people in jail and we forget about them. And I think you could have made a daring film there. So I forgive Alien 3 for being a bad movie, because of its production history and what it almost could have been. I consider it like an ambitious failure, and I always score ambitious failures higher than unambitious mediocrity, like Prometheus, right? Like I would put Alien 3 above Prometheus, because Prometheus is largely an empty film, despite being beautiful, despite visual clarity. Alien 3 is a film that, to me, didn't have a lot of visual clarity. Now it's been some time since I've seen it. I probably need to watch it again, and I may have watched it. I don't think I've watched it in HD or anything like that, right? And so it's something that probably didn't translate well to a small screen. But to me, the color palette in Alien 3 is just like, it's just murky and stuff like that. It doesn't like serve the film very well. So, yeah, there you go. That's my Alien film franchise rant. So, all right, it's the thank you time. These are the names of the people who asked questions. Code Red, Wheelad, Frant, Roadrunner, Robotoast, Zoke, Zach from Call of Discovery, Doug Darkwater, Claymore, Keyforge Clint, Thunder Effect, Toddzilla, Muffins, Ultra Gecko, Vault Boy, and thanks to everybody else in chat. If you stopped by and asked questions and commented as we went along. This is actually the URL if you want to listen to the League of Legends music that I use for the intro and exit. This is the thing I'm supposed to put up here. So I have watched Dark. I think we talked about it. I think it's been several months. I think I watched it towards the end of last year. Towards when Expanse. I think I watched it before Expanse season 5 came out. I think I finished that up right in time for the Expanse to start. So yeah, I enjoyed Dark. I think the 3rd season is like a tiny bit of a letdown, but at the same time, I think it's the only way you can write and have like a clean. Give Raised by Wolves a go. Okay, I'll check into it. I am currently watching Babylon 5. I'm in the 5th season of Babylon 5, which is, as I understand, the prelude to Crusade, which never got made, which ended up getting killed. And then I've been watching something else. Actually, I'm between shows with my significant other. We had been watching stuff together. So you thought that Babylon 5 movies were pretty good? Yeah, it's no problem. This will all be up on YouTube later, so if you missed some of the rants, then you can go watch those there. So I watched the first 2 seasons. I have not watched the 3rd season, and from what I understand, the 3rd season is something, right? Am I wrong about that? Is the 3rd season of Westworld something? I think the 2nd season of Westworld is something, where it's kind of like, is this the story you planned to tell, or is this a story that you reacted to tell? So you're watching 3 now? Yeah, I've heard 3 is heard mixed opinions, which is a polite way of saying that most people do not enjoy it. So I need to go back and watch it. I would need to watch the first. I would watch the first season again because I think the first season is very good. And then I'd like to watch the 2nd season again. Just the 2nd season was like very slow to begin with, but then got good. And then I heard season 3 was not great. So I'm not sure what their production schedule is because it seems like they only come out with that every 2 years or so. I thought season 2 was a very slow burn. So, Vault Boy, your questions were actually answered somewhere in here. I had them broken down into formats. So if you just joined the stream, you're not next. You've already been served. So you'll have to watch the VOD to catch up. I went a little long because I got into the rant. Well, I got into several good rants. I got some pretty good rants in tonight, I'd say. Yeah. Okay. That is that. I wanted to make sure I listed everybody that had asked questions. So yeah, I got some good comic book store stories in there. So yeah, the Farquaad finally earning his paycheck, finally posting some links. So, all right, that is that for tonight. I am going. Player herp. Did I not put you down? I didn't. Player herp. My default mode of ignoring player herp. Yeah, it's the D colon mode moment right there. I agree. Player herp. Sorry, you did. Your questions were in there. Your specifically the playstyle shifting. So you almost thought it was on purpose. It was actually not intentionally on purpose. But if I had to leave a name off the list, I'm glad it was yours, Player Herp. So yes, I think this will be up on YouTube. Justin is the one who imports all the stuff to YouTube, so yeah, you should be able to catch it all then. This is more stream of consciousness than I expected. But yeah. So I had some stuff kind of prepared, but some of these questions I read and like thought of an answer, but I ended up going on different tangents throughout them. So there you go. I am closing us out. One last cue. Yeah, go ahead. What do you need to face this? Well, first off, you need the will of a warrior to face me in real life. Those without the will of the warrior, I defeat before they even sit at the table. You want a rematch and you don't have the will of the warrior? Guess what? I win again. But Justin and I are planning on being at Gen Con. From what it looks like, the space is going to be very limited in those Keyforge events. So who knows what's going to happen at those Keyforge events? Honestly, who knows what Gen Con's going to look like? There's a lot of unknown about Gen Con coming up, but rest assured, we will be in Indianapolis when Gen Con is occurring. That is most likely going to be our first chance to meet Keyforge players IRL since what? Austin? Since Fort Worth. Since the Fort Worth Vault Tour, that'll be the first time we'll get to meet Keyforge players IRL. We'll probably end up playing a lot of other board games. But yeah, that's where we're planning. That'll be the first chance for us to meet people IRL. If PAX ends up happening, we may end up going to PAX. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, that's what we got. So yeah, Fort Worth. Sorry. Like all those Texas towns are the same to me. Your Austin, your Dallases, your Corpus Christi's, they're all, it's tech. I mean, I don't know, Texas geography. It's all Houston. It's all in the same area. They're all right next to each other. You can walk. You can walk from Corpus Christi to Dallas, as far as I'm concerned. So, all right, and with that geography lesson closing us out, I am going to wrap up the stream. Let's see. We're gonna listen to what was that song? This one. This one was a good one. We're gonna listen to this. Close this out. Oh yeah. All right. Once again, that's the League of Legends stuff. I'm supposed to tell you that is that song there. That these are the League of Legends songs. So as part of the Creator Commons thing. So there you go. Good night to everybody, and I will see you. See you next time. We'll be back Sunday. More Keyforge Tournament of Champions. Powering through the dark tidings.